John Wesley Hardin, a name that would become synonymous with the Wild West. You say the name, and it echoes like a gunshot across the plains, reverberating through the annals of history. Born in 1853, he grew up fast and hard in the wilds of Texas. The rugged landscape shaped him, and the harsh realities of frontier life molded his character. Life wasn't kind back then, especially not for a young man with a temper. Hardin's fiery disposition often put him at odds with those around him. Hardin learned this the hard way. His early years were marked by conflict and strife, a constant battle against the world and himself. He tangled with the law early. His rebellious nature and quick temper made him a frequent target for lawmen, petty theft, assault. These were just the beginning of his troubles. Each encounter with the law only hardened his resolve. Nothing good ever came from it. The desolate streets and abandoned towns mirrored the emptiness he felt inside. Then came the day that changed everything, a pivotal moment that would set the course for the rest of his life. 15 years old, barely a man, and he'd already taken a life. The weight of that act would follow him forever. A fight, a flash of anger, a life extinguished. In that instant, Hardin crossed a line from which there was no return. That's how it started for John Wesley Hardin, a journey into the dark heart of the Wild West. He drifted west, a fugitive on the run. The open trails and dusty paths became his new home. The Texas Badlands became his hunting ground, a place where only the strong survived. He lived by his wits, his gun always close at hand. Every day was a struggle for survival. Every sunrise could be his last. The dawn brought new dangers and new challenges. Every shadow, a potential enemy. Paranoia became his constant companion. Hardin wasn't afraid of death. He'd faced it too many times to fear it anymore. He'd looked it in the eye too many times. Each encounter with death only steeled his resolve. He'd embraced it, made it a part of him. Death was no longer an enemy, but a familiar presence. And in doing so, he became something else entirely, a figure larger than life, a legend of the Wild West, a legend whispered in saloons and campfires. Stories of his exploits spread far and wide. The name John Wesley Hardin, forever linked with violence and the untamed spirit of the West. His legacy, a testament to the brutal and unforgiving nature of the frontier. They say Hardin was fast, faster than any man alive. He carried his pistols low-slung, butts reversed. A peculiar style, some might say, but it worked for him. It gave him an edge in a world where the difference between living and dying was measured in fractions of a second. He didn't draw to show off. He drew to kill, and kill he did. Some say over 40 men met their end, staring down the barrel of his gun. Lawmen, gamblers, outlaws. It didn't matter to Hardin. He lived by his own code, a code written in blood and gunpowder. There's a story passed down through the years about Hardin and a man named Charles Cougar. They were both staying at the American House Hotel in Abilene, Kansas. Hardin, it seems, was a light sleeper. Cougar, well, he had a talent for snoring that could rattle the windows. Hardin asked him politely to quiet down. Once, twice, Cougar, either too drunk or too stubborn, ignored him. Big mistake. The next morning, they found Cougar dead in his bed, a bullet through his head. Hardin claimed self-defense. Said Cougar had reached for his gun. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Either way, it was just another notch on Hardin's gun. Even a man like John Wesley Hardin couldn't outrun the law forever. They finally caught up with him in Florida, 1877. He'd killed a man in a card game. A senseless act of violence, even for him. Sentenced to 27 years, he was shipped off to the notorious Huntsville prison. Hardin, the cold-blooded killer, the terror of the West, found himself locked in a cage, but even behind bars, Hardin was a survivor. He taught himself law, devouring books like a starving man at a feast. He became a jailhouse lawyer, writing appeals for himself and other inmates. He even managed to get his sentence reduced. Freedom's price, paranoia, and shifting sands. The story of John Wesley Hardin is one of relentless pursuit and the heavy burden of freedom. In 1894, Hardin walked out of prison a free man. After serving 16 long years, the world outside had changed, but so had he. He was 41 years old, his hair streaked with gray, but his eyes still held that same cold fire. The fire of a man who had seen too much, done too much. He went to El Paso, hoping to start anew. The bustling town offered a chance for redemption. a place where he could perhaps leave his violent past behind. He even passed the bar exam and hung out his shingle as a lawyer. It was a surprising turn for a man known more for his gun than his legal mind. But the years on the run, the violence he'd both witnessed and inflicted, had taken their toll. The scars ran deep, both physically and mentally. He was haunted by the past, convinced his enemies were closing in. Every shadow seemed a threat, every stranger a potential foe. He started drinking heavily, his temper flaring at the slightest provocation. The bottle became his refuge, but also his downfall. The old John Wesley Hardin, the one who lived for the fight, was clawing its way back to the surface. The man who had once been feared across the West was struggling to find peace in a world that had moved on without him. El Paso's Iron Fist, a city under siege. El Paso in the 1890s was a boomtown. Saloons, gambling dens, and houses of ill repute lined the dusty streets. It was a magnet for fortune seekers, gunslingers, and those with something to hide. But beneath the veneer of prosperity, a battle was brewing. The city fathers, eager to shed El Paso's reputation as a lawless frontier town, had enacted strict gun control ordinances. No more open carry, no more quick draws on the streets. For men like John Wesley Hardin, it was a slap in the face, a challenge they couldn't ignore. Love and lawlessness. Lena and the long arm of the law. Hardin, never one to shy away from a good time, found himself smitten with a young Mexican woman named Lena. She was beautiful, fiery, and trouble seemed to follow her like a stray dog. Their love affair was passionate and tumultuous, a powder keg waiting to explode. One night, Lena was arrested for disorderly conduct, a trumped-up charge orchestrated by a local lawman with a grudge against Hardin. Hardin was furious. He stormed into the jail, demanding her release. The sheriff, a man named John Selman, refused to back down. A dangerous game of cat and mouse had begun. Selman's shadow. A badge and a grudge. John Selman was a lawman with a reputation as fearsome as Hardin's. He'd killed his share of men, and he wasn't afraid to add another name to the list. Selman had heard the stories about Hardin, and he didn't believe for a second that the aging gunfighter had gone soft. He saw Hardin as a threat, a relic of a bygone era that needed to be put down. When Lena was arrested, Selman saw an opportunity to get to Hardin. He knew the gunfighter wouldn't take it lying down. He was setting a trap, and he was counting on Hardin to spring it. The Acme Saloon Showdown. Whispers of Fate, the Acme Saloon. August 19, 1895. The air hung heavy with the smell of sweat, whiskey, and anticipation. Hardin was there, playing dice. He knew Selman was looking for him, and he wasn't about to hide. He'd stared down death too many times to be afraid now. Some say Selman walked up behind Hardin and shot him in cold blood. Others claim Hardin drew first, but Selman was faster. Either way, 5 shots rang out, echoing through the saloon and into the annals of history. 5 shots in the back, the end of an era. John Wesley Hardin lay sprawled on the saloon floor, his blood staining the sawdust a dark crimson. 5 bullet holes in his back told the tale. This wasn't a fair fight. It was an execution. News of Hardin's death spread like wildfire through El Paso and beyond. Some mourned his passing, remembering him as a folk hero, a symbol of the Wild West. Others breathed a sigh of relief, glad that his reign of terror was finally over. John Selman, cleared of any wrongdoing, continued to wear his badge. But the shadow of that night in the Acme Saloon would follow him for the rest of his days. Legacy of a legend. Hardin's echo in history. John Wesley Hardin was a killer. There's no denying that. His name is etched in the annals of the Wild West as one of the most notorious outlaws. Born in 1853, Hardin's life was marked by violence from an early age. He lived by the gun and died by the gun. His first kill was at the tender age of 15, setting the stage for a life steeped in bloodshed and conflict. But he was also a product of his time, a time when violence was a way of life on the untamed frontier. The law was often a distant concept, and survival meant being the quickest draw. He was a complex and contradictory figure, a ruthless outlaw, a loving father, a self-taught lawyer. Despite his violent tendencies, Hardin had a softer side, showing deep affection for his family, and a keen intellect that led him to study law while in prison. His story is a cautionary tale, a reminder of a time when life was cheap and death was always close at hand. The numerous gunfights he engaged in and the lives he took paint a grim picture of the era. Love him or hate him, John Wesley Hardin's legend continues to fascinate us. His life story, filled with dramatic twists and turns, captures the imagination of those who study the Wild West. He was the embodiment of the Wild West, a symbol of both its allure and its brutality. His actions, both good and bad, reflect the harsh realities of frontier life, and in the end, that's perhaps the most fitting legacy of all. John Wesley Hardin remains a figure of intrigue, a man whose life story serves as a window into the tumultuous and often violent world of the American frontier.